part for world peace. We can go home.
Yeah, there you go. That's part of the film. It's a part of the film, right? Okay, so why don't you just start?
So we're talking about the core teaching in each of our faiths. We think that the core teaching in Judaism is the unfolding awakening to oneness, where that one was once conceived to be outside of ourselves. We now understand that one to be the context of all being, and that one to be the spark, the life, the presence that awakens within each and every being. We celebrate the unfolding awakening to that one and the ethical imperatives which flow from that oneness.
And in Christianity, the core teaching is love. Not love as a sentiment, but love as a commitment to see the other as beloved of God. Jesus demonstrated that love as he reached out to those that were different from him, to those his society and his culture wanted to reject. This radical love of Christianity is the lens through which we read the other texts and through which we interpret other parts of our tradition. Love that works for the well-being of each person. That's the core teaching of Christianity.
For Islam, we believe the core teaching is compassion. The Quran has 114 chapters, and virtually every single one of them starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. A Bedouin once asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what is the inner meaning of this? How can this be bestowed upon him? And the Prophet replied, this is the great secret. Be compassionate with yourself and be compassionate with others. What does it mean to be compassionate with oneself? Of course, there are many aspects to this, but the main one is, can I be gentle, merciful with my difficult feelings? Can I kiss them, transform them, and integrate them, heal them? What does it mean to be compassionate with others? One of the primary elements is, as I deal with an adversary, can I make a distinction between behavior and being? A person's behavior might be evil, but the person's being is sacred. And just keeping this discernment in my mind and heart has the power to shift heaven and earth.
Okay, so we're talking about welcoming the stranger. Go ahead, Ted, anytime.
Each of our traditions focuses in different ways on welcoming the stranger. In my tradition, in Torah itself, there are 36 statements urging, commanding, welcoming the stranger, loving the stranger. Why? Because we were strangers. We were strangers in the land of Egypt, but we were strangers not only in the land of Egypt. We Jews have had the experience over the centuries of knowing what it's like to be the stranger, to be the other. We are enjoined to open our hearts, to open our homes, to open our hands to the other and to the stranger, not simply because it's commanded, not even simply because it's right, but because we recognize extremely deeply that we are the stranger. And so we have the capacity and the need to welcome the stranger we meet.
And Jesus, as a devout Jew, grew up in this tradition of welcoming the stranger and taught again and again to welcome the stranger, to welcome the other, to welcome the foreigner sojourning in your country. Jesus began himself as a stranger in a different land when he escaped Israel and went to Egypt when his life was threatened. He teaches again and again to welcome the least of these in a long pericope in the Gospel of Matthew. It's whoever welcomes the stranger, whoever welcomes the least of these does this unto me. It's an essential value of Christianity to welcome the immigrant, the stranger, the other. If for political expediency somebody who claims to be Christian talks about turning their back on the other, they're doing that for political reasons, and they need to be clear that that does not reflect the heart of the Christian narrative.
There's a very beautiful revelation that came to the Prophet Muhammad in a dream where God says, I was a secret treasure and I longed to be known. And so I created you and the worlds, visible and invisible. It sounds that God comes in a variety of forms. Several verses in the Quran says that if God wanted, God could have made all of us one single community. But out of a divine design, God chose to create diversity, variety of languages, colors, religions, nations and tribes, men and women. And the Quran says for one primary reason, that you might come to know the other in a human way. That, it seems, is not just a question of hospitality, which is very critical. It's really a sacred obligation to know the other who is different. And of course, the Quran has another beautiful verse, a tongue-in-cheek humor verse that says, and we have created some of you to be a trial for others.
Normally he looks at me when he says that.
And normally I stand in between them to make sure nothing bad happens.
But of course, it's very, very difficult to follow this, which is why there's so much of, as you've been mentioning, cruelty, injustice, pain. And some people rightly ask, but where is God in all of this? God is all-powerful, all-aware, all-compassionate. And of course, in each of our traditions, there's a story where God does come down in a vision and says, I did do something. I created you. So when we reach out to the stranger and help the stranger, in all our traditions, our holy books say, for example, the Quran says, make the person who is a stranger and enemy your intimate friend. This is a sacred obligation.
And I sometimes cut that part. And I believe there's an internal spiritual dimension to this. When we are unable to welcome the other, the stranger, the one that is different, I wonder if that's somehow born in us of our difficulty in accepting and embracing parts of ourselves that we don't know as well, or that scare us, or that we don't understand. And so we build walls inside of us to keep parts of our identity unknown, just like we build walls between nations to keep those people who are different than us outside.
And I don't have anything else to say.
I want to make this quotation by Rumi, who says, "Oh God, you have created this I, you, we, they, to play the game of adoration with yourself." We should all play this game more.
Yeah, I have a story.
I will say one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Just in the event you use all that stuff. Maybe there's two takes, actually, with this material. One of the difficulties, it seems to me, is that we human beings tend not to do real well with commandments and with requirements. To do things out of duty, or to do things because somebody's watching, or to do things because we should, has limited value. Particularly when we are confronted by that which draws fear in us. It offers us the opportunity to truly get to know the other and to build the kind of bridges which are mutually supportive. We are asked to welcome the other because that enhances not only their humanity but our own.
Very good.
Wouldn't you say, brothers, that when we invite the stranger, it's almost like we're inviting God into our lives, and we're actually helping ourselves. Which is why I love this saying by Tagore, who says, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and found life was service. I served, and lo, service was joy." There's something mysterious, powerful, and sacred about welcoming the stranger as a service.
And it's like in Jewish tradition, there is no word for charity. The word is tzedakah, which means righteousness. It's a way of being in the world. Again, not because one is supposed to, not because it's giving somebody, it's forging a relationship where one is supporting another person. That old saw about rather than giving somebody a fish, teaching somebody how to fish, that comes through forging friendships and forging long-lasting commitments and relationships of support.
And by welcoming the stranger, we nourish within ourselves a sense of humility, because if we work with that, we recognize that we are also strangers, that we are not entitled and have not been here for a long time. When it comes to national identity, all of us are strangers in this land and came here as strangers. And that humility builds a common bond that brings people together, realizing that none of us is entitled to be here, so all of us are entitled to be here together with compassion and love and mutuality.
I would say we are strangers in a cosmic way. You know, as we get older, at least as I'm getting older, I'm realizing, my God, really, it's amazing that I and we have no idea, you know, where we come from, who we are, and where we are going, which is why I love it when Rumi says, you know, we arrive on earth a little bit tipsy. And then we realize this drunkenness must have started at some other tavern. Totally mysterious.
And some of us, you got to admit, are a little more strange than others of us.
Absolutely.
I would agree with that with all of my heart and soul. And when Jesus says, welcome the least of these,
Why do you keep looking at us when you say that?
because it illustrates the point so fabulously well. But it's also about finally coming to recognize, to strip away our hubris and to ground us in humility and to say, yes, in many ways, I am just like those that we call the least of these.
Okay. So does that kind of get that segment done?
Yeah, we can keep.
Get started. Okay, Rabbi.
We wanted to talk a little bit about Islamophobia. I think it really started in this country immediately after the tragedy, the criminal activity, the murders of 9/11. When the media began blasting us not with the criminals, but with the Islamism of those enemies, identifying evil as somehow joined with Islam. And as a response to that, when I called Imam Jamal and invited him to Shabbat services, one of the things I realized was that it was crucial for the community to witness a Jew and a Muslim working together, walking together. It was at that point, and actually for the next 9 years, that I put on the kippah to wear all the time, rather than simply when I was leading worship or teaching. And I wanted to make a clear statement. It was important to make the statement. It's not just what we say, it's what we do. And we are such vulnerable beings. And we are probably most vulnerable to fear. And the way to remove fear of others is to step closer to them, not further away. To extend a hand and to meet them as human persons. That is ultimately, just as welcoming the stranger, it is ultimately our responsibility as human beings to recognize the common spark, the common life, the common presence that glows behind the masks that each of us wears, the masks of our uniqueness, of our cultural identity, of our religion. So that fighting any phobia, whether it's a personal phobia or whether it is aimed at another group of people or another people, is something to overcome. It's a kind of sickness. And the cure is always greater love and greater compassion.
And where I agree totally with Brother Ted that relationship and love is the way we combat fear and hatred behind any phobia. Part of that love is finding the courage to tell the truth in public and in familial situations. Growing up as I did during the civil rights struggle in the suburbs of New Jersey, when I started to see the racism around me, part of what I did besides developing relationships was telling the truth when I heard people tell racist stories or make racist assumptions. And it was not comfortable. It's not comfortable to be at a family gathering and to say, I don't see it that way. Or I'm not at home with you saying that in front of my children because I don't want them to be infected by that. We don't want to scold and lose the love we have with people who see things differently. But if we're going to combat the hate, we do have to find the courage to speak truth. And part of speaking that truth is to recognize that all of our religious households have shadow sides and unwholesome stories that are part of their narrative. And to confess that about our story rather than demonize one part of the Abrahamic tradition.
So when Rabbi Ted Falcon and I got together, then our Christian brother and all our interfaith brothers and sisters, it became very clear to us, something which is known to history, that the best way, some would say the only way, to overcome dehumanization or demonization of the other is really to establish a human connection with the other. Not necessarily talk about theology or intricate theological problems, really talk about human stories. There's this wonderful saying we always repeat, that this universe is not made out of atoms, it's made out of stories. It is actually quite fascinating, this national polling we see in this country, that 70% of people, or actually 60 to 70% of Americans who say, I don't like Islam, each one of them says, I don't know personally even one Muslim. And the 37% who are in favor of Islam say, I know at least one person who is a Muslim personally. So this personal relationship is so critical. I want to make another very important point as a Muslim. You know, I as a Muslim, I want so much that non-Muslims have an appreciative understanding of Islam. I want so much that others don't do stereotyping of Islam. But you know, it is therefore critical to ask myself and my community, what am I as a Muslim, or my community as Muslims, what are we doing to have an appreciative understanding of Judaism, of Christianity, of Hinduism, Buddhism, other traditions? What are we doing to overcome the stereotyping of the other? I think it's a question which is very critical for all of us, because in this reciprocity, I think there's an energy which is so powerful, which is so sacred, that can really make all the difference in overcoming not just Islamophobia, but other religion phobia, you might say.
It's interesting because I think as Jews, we have a deeper understanding of what it's like to be the butt of prejudice, of Jew-phobia. I don't know, we don't use that word. We use anti-Semitism, which is probably, even that is a misnomer. It's probably just anti-Jewishness. It's important for us to remember that in the United States, there are still more attacks against Jews and Jewish establishments than against even Muslim persons and places. So of all the people who should rally against the demonization, the dehumanization of another people, we Jews should be in the forefront. And certainly in the civil rights movement, we were and still are. That's not to say that prejudice doesn't live within our community. That's not to say that there are some Jews that aren't glad that someone else is taking the heat rather than us. But it's to say that when we really open ourselves to the truth of our situation and our common situation, we among all others can appreciate what it's like to have others suspicious of us, to have others dislike us for nothing even we did, just for something that we are.
And where our Muslim sisters and brothers are the particular target of generalization and hatred, the whole topic of religion deserves to be dealt with more intellectual honesty and sensitivity. Broad statements in the public square about Christians or Jews or Muslims those statements are referring to huge groups of people and are utterly meaningless unless you were to parse out exactly what you mean when you're talking about what the Christians are doing in our political process, or the Jewish influence in a particular community, or who the Muslims are in this particular neighborhood. Those are big categories, and you need to really parse out what you mean. I've constantly run into people outside the church who talk about Christianity as if it's some kind of one ideological, social, political point of view, which is so far from the truth. We need to talk about people. We need to talk about specific communities and stop with generalizations, which dehumanizes all of us, I think.
Wouldn't it be beautiful if all three of us really recognize that all the religions, besides just our monotheistic traditions, are all gifts from God? How beautiful if all of us visited the services of one another's traditions. If we were open to the beauty and wisdom of one another's traditions and even incorporated some of the practices. As we say very often, this makes me not only, in my case, a better Muslim, but this waters my Islamic roots, makes me a more complete, developed human being, which is why we all say interfaith is not about conversion. It is about completion, becoming a more complete human being.
Okay, good.
And the last one.
Okay, you're on.
So we've been asked to look at the question of how in the world we are now living in we can find reason to rejoice, reason to be happy, reason to share joy with each other, with a climate that's deteriorating, with gun proliferation and murders happening daily, with a world situation where now the number of immigrants fleeing persecution has now risen above 1 million, where all countries are trying to deal with how to handle immigration, either gracefully or not. How in the midst of this can we feel joyful? But it's the essential human question, because when everything's going fine, there's no question. How can we feel joyful? Well, everything's fine. We're happy, we're joyful. The only time we really need to feel joyful is when things are dire, when there is a greater darkness, when the shadow overtakes us, both within ourselves and in our society and in our relationships. And each of our traditions in their own way seeks to inspire that kind of awakening. When Jeremiah, one of the great Hebrew prophets, Jerusalem was being besieged. This was the destruction of the temple in the 6th century BCE. The people were being taken out into exile in Babylonia, and at a certain point, he started buying land to demonstrate, like, we're coming back. This is our place. It may look one way, but I want to put energy into the solution. I want to put energy into the hope. I want to put energy into the promise. And that essentially is what we're asked to do. We're asked to rise above the constrictions of the moment and open our hearts, open our minds, open our imaginations to the kind of future which is supportive of life, supportive of the kind of joy we want to seek. Those are exactly the times we need to be sharing joy and hugging and kissing and laughter.
We light candles in darkness, not to deny that the darkness is real or to trivialize the fear that breeds in that darkness. We light the candle in darkness because we feel a sense of hope and possibility that we know the darkness will not overcome. One of my teachers, Reverend William Sloane Coffin, once said that if all we do is hate the evil without loving the good, we become nothing but damn good haters, and the world has enough of them. So while we lament what is wrong, we must remember to affirm what is good and to hold those things in tension with each other. When the attacks happened in Paris, I happened to have the honor of being on the stage introducing a band called Los Lobos, a high energetic rock and roll roots band from Los Angeles. I was doing this 2 hours after watching the attacks on TV, and I felt, how in the world can we party in downtown Tacoma, knowing what's happening in Paris today? Then I realized that we must respect what happened in Paris, but we must still live the joyful opportunity that we had that evening. So after the theater had a moment of sacred silence across all the traditions that were in that space, all those people with no tradition, all being still and pondering, I introduced this great band from Los Angeles and say, let us not let the fear take away our ability to dance, ladies and gentlemen, Los Lobos. And we had a fine night, and we went back the next day, woke up, and we worked together to try to make the world a better place.
Oh, beautiful. You know, there's a very beautiful chapter in the Quran on time. It says, by token of time, humankind is in loss, is in despair, except those who have faith and continue doing righteous deeds, and who gather in groups that honor truth and patience. So I really believe that if we have faith in something higher than human personality, good can come and we can feel joyous. I love that wonderful saying of Tagore, the Bengali poet, who says, faith is the bird that sings in the dark, knowing that dawn is coming. And how do we know dawn is coming? Well, there are so many good people underneath the surface of all those who get all the media attention. Good people who honor the truth, who are patient, doing works of righteousness that are going to make a difference. In the Quran, there's another verse, a phrase called little by little. You do this work little by little, these small little organization, communities, groups of people, and the little by little leads to incremental progress, and then there's a quantum jump. But the quantum jump won't happen until we do the little by little work. Imagine in our lifetime, did I ever think apartheid would crumble? Mm-hmm. Communism would dissolve. Berlin Wall would come down. In this country, an African American would be elected president. So I have hope and joy at all times.
Okay.